What is COVID-19? It's a good question. And it's one we should take a look at and reflect on now, 9 months after the world became aware of the term COVID-19. 9 months after we heard the dire potential that this new virus was going to inflict on all of humanity and Western society. So 9 months later, and let's stick to the proof and not the propaganda, because it's been difficult for many people to determine what is factual and what is fearful, what is proof and what is propaganda. So let's start with COVID-19 is a coronavirus. The fact is, it shares about 80% of the same characteristics and same properties as every other coronavirus. This should not come as a shock or a surprise. We all know that a species must share a predominant number of characteristics if it is indeed the same species. So COVID-19 is a coronavirus, and there's many coronaviruses. Even the common cold is a coronavirus. So they share many of the same properties, such as how they're transmitted, such as how they impact people. There are differences, and nobody will say that COVID-19 is exactly like the common cold, but it has more likenesses than dissimilarities. So that's number one. And what I'm going to say to you is all verifiable on credible resources, and I'll include some of the links in this discussion about what is COVID, because that's really, whenever you're examining or looking at anything, let's not forget the 5 W's: the who, the what, the where, the why, and sometimes how. Let's focus on what it is right at the moment. For me, the turning point in understanding what COVID-19 is and how severe it is and what precautions we should take, the turning point for me was when the Diamond Princess cruise ship was finally declared safe and people were evacuated after quite an extended period of time in quarantine. So, for facts, the Diamond Princess had nearly 4,000 people, passengers and crew on that ship. They performed over 3,000 tests for COVID. About 700, a little over 700 tests came back as positive. And by the time the ship was vacated, 7 people had died with or from COVID. Now, if you compare that back to the models that we were hearing, in Canada, we were expecting upwards of 350,000 deaths. In Ontario alone, the Ford administration was saying we could face potentially 100,000 deaths. But on a closed environment of a passenger cruise liner, the Diamond Princess, 7 people died. They were the elderly. They were people with other illnesses. It wasn't the crew, it wasn't the younger crew, it was elderly people. So this is something that's different. This is than other coronaviruses. It was more severe, and it is more severe for elderly people with underlying illnesses. But it still was nowhere near the catastrophic models the apocalyptic projections that the leading epidemiologists were proclaiming back in February and March. We heard at that time the infection fatality rate was in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 infection fatality rate. And it ends up, the evidence is, it's closer to 1, very similar to the flu. We heard that the RO, the amount of people that you would reinfect if from one person being infected, was between 5 and 7. If one person got COVID, they would infect 5 to 7 others. Well, the evidence and the fact, the proof, is now that it is under 1. Of course, there's the Western world and our country, Canada, Ontario, is still gripped with this irrational view that COVID is a danger to everyone, when the evidence demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt it is not dangerous to everyone. But we've seen our public health authorities and governments decide that it's no longer about not overwhelming our hospitals. It's not about flattening the curve. Now we're seeing governments alter and shift their view that it's cases that we must base our policies on. Well, we understand and know, again, without any doubt, the PCR test that we use as our baseline for all our health measures against COVID, the PCR test is a faulty, failed diagnostic. It doesn't test for infection. It doesn't test for live viruses. It tests for remnants and fragments of old, discarded, defeated viruses. Often, people, if you've had a cold within the last 6 months, your test with the PCR will come back positive. That is a known fact. Dr. Michael Yeadon, Dr. Carl Hennigan, the world's top health experts and scientists have demonstrated beyond a doubt that the PCR test is false and faulty, yet governments around the world continue to use it to base these outrageous and irresponsible and harmful lockdown and restrictions on all of us. That's some of the facts of what COVID is. But I'm going to share you my own personal story as well. Since March, since the end of March, in the beginning of April, I have not practiced what public health has told us to practice. I have kept my social interactions up. I have people at my house frequently. We have euchre games. We may have some drinks. Over the summer, I had pool parties. Okay? And all my family does. Now, you can say that I'm irresponsible. You could say many things. But that's a fact that myself and my family, after looking at the evidence and the proof and thinking about things critically, thoughtfully, we made our own choices. We made our own decisions. And everybody who has been over to my house and who has enjoyed a game of euchre, or who has enjoyed a bonfire party, or has done work at my house, and there's been many, they all chose to come over free, with free will and free understanding. And this is one of the great paradoxes that we see in COVID right now. Most people, well, many people, Many people understand exactly what I'm saying, and they live their lives the same way in private. But because of censorship by our media, because of potential public shaming on social media, they choose not to be public about what they know is the falsehoods of how dangerous COVID is, the danger that it poses to individuals. It was interesting this summer, on many occasions, when in Ontario, weddings were banned and many people had to cancel their weddings. But I can tell you, I attended a number of weddings for friends and close loved ones, and that they were all held outside in the backyards and in the back fields of Lanark County. People went with no masks. They were responsible, but none and no one ever was sick or ill. And I think that's the other important proof, is that we now know that about 80% of those who test positive have no symptoms, none whatsoever. And I think that goes back to the faulty PCR test, where we know it's not testing for infections. And the Premier, Doug Ford, has stated this. Public health has stated this. So we have to ask ourselves, why are so many people living with such concern and such dread and taking such precautions for something, for a virus, a coronavirus, that is more like the common cold than it isn't? Just to end this off, we know the average age for people who have died with COVID, and I say that specifically with COVID, is over the age of 80. In most jurisdictions, between 70 and 80% of all COVID-related deaths have happened in long-term care homes or nursing homes. COVID-19, to me, on examination of all the proof and rejecting of the propaganda, tells me we should lead normal lives with full freedoms and have our responsibilities to exercise our own judgment reinstated and defended. If you like these videos, if you like my videos, make sure to like my page, share the video, and share with your friends, tag your friends, and let's enjoy freedom and no more lockdowns.